But like, if I die tomorrow, I know I would go with a smile on my face. I know I haven't wronged anybody, and keeping your sanity. It's not easy, man. And when you try to explain it to people, more often than not, they don't get it, and then it's just it becomes the individual journey.
Police officers still on the scene, standing behind the yellow caution tape. This is the beach where the unspeakable tragedy occurred, sparking headlines, grief, and shock. Costa Rica Emergency Response Director Wagner Leiva's team got the 911 call from Playa Cocos Beach at 2:10 p.m. on Sunday afternoon. Upon arrival, they found two males pulled from the water, he says. One they saved. But Malcolm, despite their best efforts, showed no vital signs and was pronounced dead on the scene.
It looks like the feds just cracked open a bombshell, an alleged flash drive tied directly to Malcolm-Jamal Warner. And this wasn't just random files or family photos. Insiders claim it had names of politicians, powerful media bosses, and Hollywood shot callers that the elite supposedly spent years trying to keep under wraps. But here's the twist that doesn't make sense. Malcolm wasn't even the one with beef in those circles. Yet somehow, he's the one gone while the people with everything to lose are still out here living like nothing happened. Once you dig into how far this allegedly went just to keep that flash drive hidden, Malcolm's death stops looking like gossip and starts looking a whole lot more like a full-blown cover-up. And that's when the timeline gets shady, because the official story of how he died kept flipping every couple of hours, like someone was rewriting the script in real time. When the news first broke, headlines screamed that Malcolm drowned while swimming with his young daughter. Some outlets even pushed reports that surfers spotted him and the child struggling in the waves before pulling them both back to shore. That version spread fast, until it didn't. Just a few hours later, the official correction dropped. Suddenly, they claimed Malcolm wasn't with his daughter at all. Instead, he was supposedly swimming with a male friend while the little girl stayed safe on the sand. But then, boom! Yet another version popped up. Now they were saying Malcolm had gone out alone for an early morning swim before sunrise, and that's when tragedy struck. So which story is the truth? Was he with his daughter, with a friend, or all by himself? Each new update only made the whole thing look sketchier. Every time the story changed, it felt less like clarity and more like damage control. When the narrative shifts this many times, it usually means somebody behind the scenes is pulling strings and trying real hard to hide the real truth. And that's exactly why the next detail that surfaced had people pausing even harder. While the media was busy spinning new versions of the timeline, another shocking twist slipped through the cracks. Malcolm-Jamal Warner's wife wasn't even in Costa Rica when all this went down. That little fact alone makes the whole story sound 10 times stranger. Because if she wasn't there, then who exactly was piecing together these shifting official accounts? Here's where it gets messy. Insiders say Warner's family eventually stepped in and released their own version, that he went for a quiet solo sunrise swim near their resort, never came back, and was later discovered unresponsive near a rocky coral-filled stretch of water. A tragic story, sure, but does it really line up with all those earlier reports? Think about it. 3 totally different versions of the same man's last moments, all within the first 24 hours. That's not just sloppy reporting. That screams like somebody is rewriting the script on purpose. And if Malcolm really was holding on to something dangerous on that alleged flash drive, then changing the timeline of his death could have been the very first move in burying the truth. But here's where things get downright chilling. The only reason we even know pieces of what happened that morning at Playa Grande is because of one witness, a doctor who just so happened to be vacationing there. And the way he described what he saw didn't sound like your typical drowning at all. According to this anonymous doctor, he was about 200 meters away when sudden screams for help tore across the beach. He said instinct kicked in. He grabbed his surfboard, sprinted toward the chaos, and paddled hard into the dangerous waves. Then, through the choppy water, he spotted what he described as a shadow beneath the surface. That shadow was Malcolm-Jamal Warner. Now let's stop and think about this for a second. If Malcolm-Jamal Warner had really been struggling in the water with his daughter, or even with a friend, wouldn't people on the beach have seen 2 or 3 figures fighting the current? Wouldn't there be twice the panic, more screaming, more chaos? But the witness doctor only ever mentioned spotting one shadow beneath the waves. Malcolm's body all alone. And here's where it gets even more suspicious. He wasn't the only medical professional on that beach. Reports say that 2 tourists, who also happened to be doctors, rushed forward the moment Warner was pulled to shore. That means 3 different doctors were fighting to save his life. Eyewitnesses swore those doctors worked on him nonstop for 45 minutes straight. CPR, chest compressions, oxygen attempts, everything you can imagine. Then, once the Costa Rican Red Cross showed up, they brought in defibrillators and still nothing. 3 trained professionals, plus an entire rescue team, and not even the faintest spark of revival. And here's the chilling part. Most drowning victims, if they're reached quickly, at least have a slim chance of survival, especially with that many skilled hands on deck. But with Malcolm-Jamal Warner, nothing worked. It was as if something beyond the waves had already decided his fate before he was even pulled from the water. That's why so many people can't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some tragic accident. It's like there was another force at play, something way bigger than a riptide. And the next detail makes that suspicion impossible to ignore. When Warner was finally pulled from the water, lifeless, reports claimed another man had also been dragged out alongside him. This second victim was said to be in critical condition and rushed to a local clinic. But here's the wild part. After that single mention, his name and condition completely vanished from the headlines. The Costa Rican Red Cross confirmed it happened, but media outlets suddenly went quiet, almost like somebody was trying to erase the fact that there even was a second victim. And let's not forget, there weren't even lifeguards on duty that day. Playa Grande's own lifeguard team later admitted they weren't patrolling the beach at all due to lack of resources. So the only people available to respond were random tourists and one vacationing doctor who just happened to be right there at the exact moment Warner went under. You telling me that's just coincidence? Or does that sound a little too convenient? Now look at this story. No lifeguards, 3 different versions of how he ended up in the water, a mysterious second man who disappeared from the record, and a team of doctors fighting for nearly an hour but failing to bring Warner back. At some point, the story stopped sounding tragic and starts sounding staged. That's when it hit me. If even the rescue attempt has holes, maybe Warner didn't just drown. Maybe someone wanted to make sure he never left that beach alive. Think about it. An actor with alleged knowledge of explosive secrets tied to a flash drive that supposedly listed powerful names suddenly dies under the most confusing circumstances imaginable. And the details keep getting scrubbed. So was the drowning just the cover story? Because when you tie this back to the whispers about that flash drive, it starts feeling less like an accident and more like an execution. The real question isn't how Malcolm-Jamal Warner died. It's who had the motive to shut him up and why it had to happen on that trip he was so excited for. You could literally see it in his whole vibe before everything went down. There's even a clip floating around from the plane when they first landed in Costa Rica. Malcolm's grinning ear to ear, cracking jokes, clowning with folks, and clearly just waiting to touch that water. That wasn't a man weighed down by stress. That wasn't someone secretly spiraling. That was a man who couldn't wait to live it up on vacation. You can't fake that type of energy. It was pure joy. And yet just a few days later, we were suddenly being fed the storyline that he accidentally drowned. Like really? How does someone that full of life, that hyped up, and who actually knew how to swim, just vanish into the waves like that? The math isn't mathing. And the fans noticed it too. Social media lit up with the same questions, the same doubt. One person even dropped a chilling comment saying how twisted it was to think about dying on a family vacation when the man looked so vibrant and alive in that plane video. People close to him doubled down on it too, reminding everyone that Malcolm was a strong swimmer. He grew up in the water. This wasn't some rookie tourist who didn't know what he was doing. So why was the official story trying to paint him as careless, weak, or unlucky in the surf? For people who actually saw his last public moments, that narrative doesn't fit. Not one bit. And that disconnect between the happy, glowing Malcolm we all saw and the tragic drowning victim we were told about only made the whispers about something darker even louder. To me, this whole thing feels way too neat, almost scripted. And that's where the flash drive comes crashing back into the story. Because here's what people forget. This trip wasn't just about cocktails on the beach or family fun in Costa Rica. Insiders swear Malcolm-Jamal Warner had something with him on that trip. The very same flash drive that the feds mysteriously leaked after he was gone. And from what's being whispered, that drive wasn't some folder of half-baked notes. No, this was the kind of hard evidence that could shake entire industries. Names, dates, receipts, connections, allegedly the type of information that could put so-called untouchables in a very touchable position. The kind of file people in power would do anything to bury. Now line it all up. Malcolm lands in paradise, full of life, joking on the plane, grinning like he's finally ready to let the world in on whatever he's been holding. The energy of a man who knows he's about to make waves, not disappear in them. And then, out of nowhere, he's gone. Just like that. And notice the timing. The flash drive only comes to light once the feds get their hands on it, long after he's no longer around to explain it himself. So you tell me, was that pure coincidence? Or was the trip itself the setup, the perfect stage to silence him before those files could blow the lid off people with everything to lose? So when I say the reporting around Warner's death was messy, I'm not just talking sloppy journalism, it was a circus. And like any circus, someone was behind the curtain pulling the strings, trying to distract us while the real act played out. Every outlet kept pumping out a new version of events, and instead of clearing up the confusion, it only made the whole thing look shadier. But then the story took a wild turn, and honestly, a downright disrespectful one. Because out of everybody they could have reached out to, some outlets actually decided to ask Bill Cosby for a comment. Bill Cosby, of all people. Cosby even had the nerve to compare hearing about Malcolm-Jamal Warner's passing to the pain he felt losing his own son. The internet snapped instantly. One furious user tweeted, "Nobody gives a ish what you have to say about anything. Your position as a caring person is forfeit." And that single tweet pretty much summed up the outrage of letting Cosby, of all people, weigh in on Malcolm's death. But the backlash didn't stop there. Another person wrote flat out, "You also never stopped being a vile creature. Rot in hell." The anger was loud, raw, and relentless, because for most people, Cosby speaking on Warner's name felt like a slap in the face. And here's where things got real dark. Once Cosby's name entered the conversation, people online started connecting dots that hadn't been mentioned before. Decades of allegations, his prison sentence, the way Hollywood went silent around him, and suddenly, Malcolm-Jamal Warner's suspicious death didn't look like just another tragic accident in the water. For a lot of people, it started to feel like part of a bigger, uglier web, one tied to secrets, silence, and powerful figures who always seem to slither their way out of the spotlight when the truth creeps too close. At this point, it stopped being just about how Malcolm-Jamal Warner died. It became about what he might have known. That rumored flash drive suddenly looked a whole lot less like some internet myth and a whole lot more like the missing piece to a bigger puzzle. And people online weren't just speculating randomly. Some were convinced that Malcolm was sitting on evidence tied to dark secrets in Hollywood, the kind of secrets powerful people would do anything to keep buried. Whispers spread that Warner had information connected to the mistreatment of young actors in the industry, evidence he may have locked away on that very drive. One chilling comment claimed, "He knew too much about what happened to child stars and who was behind it. That's why this happened to him." For many, that theory explained everything. The constantly changing media narratives, the way certain names seem to avoid scrutiny, and why the feds only let pieces of the alleged drive slip out after Warner was gone. And here's the part that made fans' skin crawl. Malcolm wasn't the only former Cosby Show child star whose name made headlines that same week. Reports said another actor, Louis Rowe, was found dead on July 14th, just days before Warner's drowning. Two former child actors, tied to the same show, gone in the same week. Call it coincidence if you want, but a lot of folks online aren't buying it. So instead of the world just mourning Malcolm-Jamal Warner in peace, his passing spiraled into a full-blown media storm. Suddenly, it wasn't just about one man's tragic death, it was about patterns, power, and whether the truth about that flash drive could explain why two lives were cut short in such a suspicious window of time. Conspiracy threads spread online like wildfire. And the wildest part is that months before all this chaos, Malcolm-Jamal Warner was already talking about legacy. Not fame, not money, legacy. In one interview, he even said, "My proudest achievement is being able to have a post-Cosby life and post-Cosby career and still have my head on as straight as possible." Now fans are asking, what exactly was that legacy? Was it really just about his career? Or was it the contents of that rumored flash drive? Is that why certain powerful figures made sure it never saw daylight while he was still alive? Because here's what people forget. Malcolm wasn't some washed-up actor living off old fame. In the months leading up to his death, he was deeply reflecting on his life, his marriage, his family, and the road he built outside the Cosby Show. And the one thing that stood out again and again was how much he valued living with integrity. Friends say he wanted to leave this world remembered not as Theo Huxtable, but as a man who stood for fatherhood, mental health, and independence in an industry that eats people alive. That doesn't sound like a man checking out on vacation. It sounds like someone who believed he was sitting on something bigger than himself, something he wanted preserved even if it put him in danger. And that's where the whispers about the flash drive get darker. Word in the streets was that Warner had been collecting files on Hollywood's hidden abuse of child actors. Not just rumors, but names, connections, maybe even recordings. Some even believe the drive wasn't meant to be leaked at all. It was his insurance policy, a way to protect his family in case things got ugly. So when you listen back to those interviews about legacy, the whole tone shifts. Suddenly it doesn't sound like nostalgia. It sounds like a warning. Like he was already hinting that he had something dangerous tucked away and that he wanted people to remember him as someone who never played the dirty PR games or chased clout. Malcolm-Jamal Warner moved differently. He didn't gossip for attention. He didn't feed scandals for headlines. He moved with discipline, integrity, and purpose, which is exactly why so many people now believe he might have been the kind of man to quietly collect receipts, and why that made him real dangerous to the people whose names might have been on that drive. If Malcolm-Jamal Warner really was holding onto a flash drive that exposed elite figures, suddenly the messy cover story around his death makes way too much sense. The constant timeline changes, the way the second victim mysteriously vanished from headlines, even the strange involvement of federal agents in what was supposed to be just a drowning thousands of miles away. It all fits once you consider what might have been at stake. And here's the kicker. Not everybody was buying the tragic accident version to begin with. From the moment the news broke, people were already side-eyeing it. One fan wrote, "Sounded fishy from the start. Hope it gets investigated." And they weren't alone. Suspicion spread fast, and the chatter only grew louder when people close to Malcolm started speaking out. Even some of his former co-stars couldn't shake the doubts. Remember Eddie, the actor who played his best friend on screen and stayed his real-life friend long after the cameras stopped rolling? Eddie's always been vocal about conspiracies, but this time it hit different. At first, he posted a heartbreaking tribute that had fans in tears. But later, he switched gears. And what he said made everybody stop in their tracks. Speaking directly to his audience, Eddie admitted he just couldn't accept the official story. He called it out plain and simple, saying the drowning was way too suspicious to be called an accident. And his exact words still echo through social media. "I don't believe that man's drowned. I don't." That wasn't a stranger on Twitter or a random YouTube comment. That was one of Malcolm's closest friends, someone who knew him off camera, standing up and saying the story didn't add up. And when people like that start questioning the narrative, it stops being rumor and starts feeling like a truth somebody didn't want told. Here's where things get wild, because some people believe Eddie wasn't just doubting the accident itself. They think he was hinting that Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death had everything to do with what he was about to expose. That same secret flash drive the FEDS supposedly leaked after the fact. If Warner really had files that could bring down elite figures, then brushing off his death as a drowning feels a little too neat, too clean, too convenient. Let's be real for a second. People don't just vanish like that unless there's something deeper in play. And when you start peeling back all the layers of Warner's so-called accident, one question keeps screaming back. Who actually stood to gain from him being gone? Think about it. Warner wasn't just another actor riding out old fame. He was connected to circles where billion-dollar deals lived and died. Circles built on silence, where one wrong leak could destroy reputations, sink legacies, and topple entire empires. So when people online started connecting the dots, they realized it wasn't just about him holding a flash drive. It was about the kind of leverage that flash drive represented, and that's the chilling part. If Malcolm really was gearing up to step forward with what he knew, or even if he slipped and hinted to the wrong person that he was holding receipts, then his death doesn't read like a tragic accident anymore. It reads like a cleanup job. The shifting stories, the vanishing second victim, the silence from certain media outlets, it all starts to look less like coincidence and more like orchestration. And if that's true, then Warner's final days weren't random at all. They were calculated, planned, and executed to keep those files from ever seeing the light of day. And here's the part that really sends a shiver down your spine. Right after Malcolm-Jamal Warner's passing, insiders swear certain people in the industry got real quiet. Projects that had his name attached, gone, vanished like they never existed. Folks who once proudly called him family, suddenly acting like he was a stranger. That kind of silence isn't respect, it's fear. So the question keeps circling back. Who actually benefited from Warner being gone? The elites who got to keep their names buried out of the headlines? The powerful figures who didn't have to flinch at the thought of their secrets spilling into the public? Maybe even the same ones who insiders now believe the feds are trying to corner, using Warner's lost flash drive as leverage behind the scenes? And here's where it gets even darker, because nobody can answer the biggest question of all. If that drive is real, and if federal agents are holding it, does the truth ever actually see daylight? Or does it get locked away, turned into a bargaining chip, traded like a weapon in the shadows, while the public is fed distraction after distraction? That's the scariest part. For some, Warner's death wasn't just about silencing one man. It was about controlling a narrative, about burying evidence so powerful it could shake the foundations of Hollywood, politics, and media all at once. And until that flash drive is fully exposed, the truth stays trapped, hidden in the dark, where powerful people want it to stay. So what do we really have here? A man who lived with integrity, who spoke about legacy, who landed in paradise grinning and full of life. And just days later, he's gone under circumstances that still don't add up. A flash drive rumored to hold the darkest names in Hollywood. A second victim erased from the record. Shifting timelines that look less like confusion and more like a cover-up. And now, a silence so heavy, it feels forced. Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death was packaged as a tragic accident. But the deeper you dig, the more it looks like a story rewritten to protect the untouchable. The question is, if that flash drive really exists, do we ever see the truth? Or does it stay buried forever, traded in back rooms while the public's left with half-truths? One thing's for sure, this isn't the last time Warner's name will be whispered when the conversation turns to secrets the elites don't want us talking about. His story isn't just about loss, it's about the fight for truth in a world built on silence. And if you want the real breakdowns the mainstream won't touch, you already know where to go, BarzBuzz. Because out here, the whispers turn into answers, and the stories they try to bury, we dig them back up.